Yeah. Hi, Melanie, and welcome to the show.
Hi,
Um,
Greg.
so we've worked a bit together in the past, and I think you have an amazing concept for your game and a really interesting story. So I wanted to bring you on and just kind of talk about how you got your start in indie game development.
Oh, well, thanks. Thanks for liking our project. Um, yeah, how did I get to start indie game development? I took a circuitous route. I first got a PhD in biochemistry, and then I got a grant from the NIH to make a video game, and to, most importantly, to evaluate a game that was already made. And and I used the data from what I found out from the first evaluation to create a sequel. And I took advantage of what's happening in games now, several trends, right? Tablet games, and the develop of something called mid-core games, where it's not really a casual game, but it's not you don't have an hour-long tutorial either. So like I took advantage of all these trends and made a game that will teach even better and will be even more popular.
That's awesome. And I just wanted to go back just a little bit. So since you have a PhD in biochemistry, and then so how did you start wanting to make games? And then since you didn't major in making games or software development, how did you get started like making games?
That was pretty funny, actually. I started making games. I wanted to teach people about biochemistry.
Hmm.
And I didn't like the fact that most people think biochemistry is hard, most people shy away from it. I was scared of it when I went to college, even though I desperately wanted to do it. And I thought that, we could make cartoon stories or comic books or games about biochemistry, and then people would own it. They'd be like, that's my character, that's my enzyme. Kids know hundreds of Pokemon and they know hundreds of superheroes and they understand how to inhibit those characters and how to activate them and how they interact and what they'll do in any situation. So there's no reason why we couldn't make an awesome story about biochemistry. The one problem is that, who's going to pay you to make that story?
Right.
Exactly. So I experimented with different aspects of game making when I was out of college. It was 1995. I had a political science degree and I had taken all my pre-med classes. I was really well qualified not to make games. I didn't know any art, I didn't know any programming. So I sat down to a computer assisted design class in 1994 in Cincinnati, and yeah, 3D animation was just blew my mind. The software program itself. So I knew that I loved biochemistry, and I knew that a biochemist was going to need to be on the team of a game that was truly going to be about biochemistry. So I decided to be the biochemist on the team, and I applied to grad school in biochemistry because I wanted to make a game about biochemistry. Right, biochemistry professors really actually think it's hilarious. And
So
when
when
I
you applied, then did you say you were specifically interested in making a game, or did you find like a group of people that were wanting to make or were making games, and you decided that to approach them about making a biochemistry game, or
No, I applied to my PhD program in 1997. Nobody was making learning games, really, not like this. It was a whole different time for games in general, 1997, right? I mean, you had to buy a professional copy of an engine and, apply to get it on a console. So it was a different time.
yeah, and I remember Half-Life was just coming out, I think, the next year or something like that. So
Yeah, I basically decided I was going to need to be a professor and I would write a grant to make a game after that. And so I really sank myself into biochemistry, and I loved it. I love biochemistry. I worked every day, every single day for 3 years, and then after 3 years, I started taking Sunday afternoons off. And I worked on Drosophila. I did fruit fly genetics. I did biochemistry mostly, smashing up a lot of fruit fly larvae and growing a lot of cells. And all along, I always tried to explain to people what I was doing, and people were very enthusiastic. I was working on cancer, and I was curing cancer. But when I tried to explain what I was doing and how close we were to answering certain questions, people get stuck at, this is a cell, it's got a receptor, here's proteins, they're doing things. People generally know proteins are important, but they don't know that you have 40,000 different genes, they have 40,000 different kinds of proteins you can make, and each protein has a different task to do. So what I really wanted was for general education about proteins to be at a higher level.
Hmm.
And since they're invisible and abstract, we don't teach them to grade school kids. Fifth graders, they know what a tsunami is. They know what equal and opposite forces are, and they can tell you about cumulus clouds, but they don't know anything about the structure of a protein because you can't see it. So if we made structures of proteins on computers and they could play with it, they could know what they are, the same as a tsunami or a cumulus cloud.
Hmm.
No. I'm all over the place.
So how did you then, you knew you wanted to do this, so how did you make the transition to actually doing it? Like, sort of what was your start? Like, did you start programming stuff yourself, or did you have someone do it for you?
No,
Or?
I have not programmed anything. I started by writing a story. I wrote 5 chapters of an awesome story called The World of the Cell, and Amy the amylase is our first hero. And Amy goes off on a grand adventure and discovers why the amylase break starch into sugar. And then she gets destroyed by a protease, and the next chapter is about the first enzyme in glycolysis.
So this
And
is like a children's storybook type book, or is it more like
yeah,
a...
it's sort of like a stoner's video book. Yeah, talking enzymes. I don't know who this audience is, but it's yeah, it's sort of like a chapter book for a 12-year-old. I think I should really publish it. So what I did was that was the story, that was the game I wanted to make, and I had an idea that there'd be a chapter of a book, and then there'd be a game about each one of the enzymes. And so in 1990, no, let's see, it was 2006, I went to NYU, and a guy named Jan Plas has a program at NYU called Create, and it's a learning science educational games program. And we had a bunch of grad students in the program, and they took my game and made it into a proof of concept. So now you can actually read a chapter, an interactive comic book version of the first amino acids ever to speak to each other, and then you can play a game with them. And that got me hooked. So uh, I found another video game online, Immune Attack. You can
Mhm.
still download it at immuneattack.org. It's for PC. And I wrote to the people who made it and said, hey, I'm doing this postdoc, but I would like to get into games. And they said, we need a manager for this project. Why don't you come and manage it? So I did, moved to DC, worked for a think tank, wrote a grant. That's how I got the funding. I was really lucky that I happened upon a really innovative group of people, Henry Kelly and Michelle Fox at the Federation of American Scientists, and a bunch of other people they worked with to write. In 2004, they wrote a grant to the NSF to make a biology video game. And nowhere in the grant application do they use the word video or game.
So, so was it? Did you put learning? Was it like a learning piece of software,
Immune Attack?
or I mean, just like how did you write the grant? Like if there was no game in there at all.
Yeah, it's very interesting. They had a graphic artist, graphic design expert, whose name I'm forgetting right now. He was at Rice, I think. So there was a lot of talk about using technology and teaching and being engaging and immersive, just not a lot of straight up talk about the game mechanism.
Mhm.
So
So did you have management experience before then, when they brought you in to be a manager, or how did you
hmm.
sort of get into that?
Yeah, I had managed people other grad students, technicians in the lab. You have limited resources in the lab, and so you really need to be able to explain to people that what they really need to do. You have to be there to answer questions, but of course nobody wants to be watched, and you've got your own stuff to do. So you really learn how to manage people really well in a lab. The difference between scientists and anybody else in the world is that scientists were not getting paid much, and we're all doing it sort of for the love of science and because we're trying to learn. And so scientists tend to be really self-motivated, which those kinds of people are amazingly easy to manage.
Yeah, and that seems like a good crossover too, because indie game developers are pretty self-motivated usually. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
just
that
because
is
you're
true.
building all these aspects yourself, and you're doing it because you love games. So
Hmm. That is true.
yeah. So with that group, then did you end up building so were you managing then immune attack, or were you building
Ah,
immune
okay.
defense then, or?
All right, this is the very beginning of my career. So immune attack was it took 4 years and NSF grant plus a whole lot of supplemental grants to get it together. And they had a hard time. FAS did and Rice did had a hard time getting the game program. They had scientists who worked it out, but they
So and
had
what was, I guess, sorry to cut you off, but so the
yeah.
immune attack, what type of game was it? Just so the listeners sort of know what it is.
Oh, the third-person shooter. You fly around inside the body, you activate proteins, and things happen after the proteins get activated. So the proteins all have their jobs to do, but nothing happens until they're activated with your ray gun. So it's very, very good at teaching the player that proteins each have a different job to do. And it's really neat. And when I took over the project, I wanted to expand it into a more of a puzzle game, more of an experiment, so you can activate this protein and then see what happens, and activate that protein, see what happens. Immune attack is very linear. So you're told what to do. You're told find this protein and shoot it, and then you're told find that protein and shoot it. It's a great prototype. It's cutting edge. Like there's nothing else like it. It was it was 2008 when it came out. So it's what I really wanted to do was build on what it already has. And the guy that made it was awesome. Escape Hatch Entertainment, Gary Gaber. He made it in Vicious Engine. He did not want to switch to the Unity engine, and I wanted to switch because we couldn't make a Mac game. Tablets were creeping up, things like that. So I wanted to switch to Unity. So that meant Gary Gaber was out of the picture, and he had done everything on the project before. So I suddenly had to find new people. I found two great people, Graham Johnson and Ken Coulter. Both of them are medical illustrators, programming experience, art experience, great. And two separate disasters meant that they couldn't work with me. We'd been talking for a year, and in the meantime, while we were trying to get this 3D shooting puzzle game together, and I still have all the designs. We've got awesome 3D puzzles to experience inside the body. While we we're doing that, I had written a game design for a two-dimensional game that was a tower defense game. And the reason I did that was I wanted to introduce all 7 white blood cell types, and it's faster to do that as a tower defense game, where you buy the easy ones and cheap ones, and then you build up to the more complicated white blood cells, just like any other tower defense game. You start with a simple gun, and you can get better guns. So,
And for that, so how did you determine like what, since at that level it's so small, how did you determine sort of what elements to include for that?
oh, that's a very good question. Yeah, so I spent 6 months making it out on paper, and it started out being pure tower defense on paper, with a huge piece of paper with a blood vessel going through it, and the bacteria were going to be in the blood vessel and the cells were going to be on the outsides. And the player was going to be able to place cells anywhere there was a cytokine cloud. The cells would be attracted to the cytokines. And we worked it out so that if you put down a neutrophil, neutrophils will eat bacteria, but a neutrophil will eat more bacteria if you put a macrophage close to it, because a macrophage can activate the neutrophil. And so it was more simple. It was more of a board game. If this was close by, then this would happen. It was more based on a grid, and there was not a lot of movement between the cells.
Mm-hmm.
And it was reasonable. Then we started coding it up, and we had, the cloud of cytokines floating around, and we had the cell in the middle of it, and the players, we all did, grabbed at the cytokines. We wanted to see if we could move the things that were moving, and so we redesigned it, and we created a game where basically what you have now, if you watch our trailer, uh, and it's also more biologically accurate. You have the blood vessel, and the bacteria are outside the blood vessel in the tissue where they typically are, and the cells have to squeeze out of the blood vessel and get into the tissue, and they will follow the cytokines to get to the bacteria. So in our game now, things are more accurate, and you are just speeding up what the immune system is already doing. So
did you start on that? Sorry, did you start on that game at the same time as you were finishing Immune Attack, or like were they at the same time, or did you like switch the team?
Nah, Immune Attack 2 was going to be this third-person puzzle game with Graham and Ken and me. It's going to be terrific. Graham and Ken couldn't keep going because of things that, like the University of Texas system decided to get rid of medical illustration. And so Ken's moved on to a fantastic career as a programmer of things like bridges and awesome things like that. And Graham, he's now at UCSF doing more awesome things. And we still want to collaborate, but at that point when we were ready to go, we couldn't work on our 3D game. So I also knew that making anything was going to take a lot of work and a lot of iteration and a lot of playtesting. And so switching to a 2D game that focused on all 7 cells made a lot of sense. And at the same time I was doing production, I was also doing evaluation of the original game, Immune Attack 1. And so those evaluations were amazing. The kids could answer all my questions. They had amazing amounts of confidence in their ability to look at molecular science and cell biology diagrams. And so what I was learning is that kids wanted more information. I was also, going to lots of learning conferences and meeting lots of people, and I was hearing the same thing from them. So Diane Kettlehut had a really neat simulation called Sheep Trouble, and the whole idea was you would go in this world and you would use the scientific method rather than just writing down the scientific method is this. You would use it and test it. And she was amazed that all the kids' response was the same. Like, we want it to be more difficult. This little puzzle we have to figure out is too easy. And Sheep Trouble is basically like, it's like playing Zelda for an hour. You have to figure out why some of these sheep can't get to the top of the hill. They're dying because they can't eat the right things, and they can't go up the hill because their legs are too long. And for a kid that's already played Zelda, it's really easy. You look at this, look at that, look at this, look at that. So, long story short, if I could make a game that could teach all 7 cell types and how they interact and what molecules are involved, if I could cram all this data into a 2D game, we could teach all that, because the kids were eating it up in Immune Attack, and a 2D game would be a lot easier to produce.
So was the move then to 2D just based on ease for development, or was it, I guess?
No, it was really based on 3 things. Like ease of development, absolutely, but the fact that you can cram more detailed information into a strategy game than you really can in a 3D game. And then the other thing is I wanted it to be something that appealed to a really wide audience. So we wanted it to be easier to make. We wanted it to be more informative. But I was starting to get evidence from my analysis with Immune Attack that kids who kids who said Immune Attack was easy to play, so the kind of kid that likes a third-person shooter, the kind of kid that does ASDW and can do the right mouse button to aim and shoot, and also just whatever minds this particular user interface spoke to. Those kids would play longer, they would answer more questions, they would have more confidence. And those kids were not necessarily the kids that like games to start with. So I asked kids how many hours a week they played, and you couldn't really predict how well they were going to do on the test based on whether they like games or not. But you could predict how well they were going to do on the test by how much of immune attack they actually played. So the third reason why I wanted to go with a 2D casual game is that I was getting data showing that kids like learning a lot, they like the game being complicated, but they needed the game to be easy to play. And not easy, boring, and simple, but well designed and well, what do you call it? Like smooth and intuitive.
Yeah, and 2D games seem to lend themselves easier to that because a lot of 3D is sort of figuring out what the user interface should be and
Exactly,
how to navigate
exactly.
the world. So
You do. And right around that time, I watched George Fan's lecture at GDC about how to make a good tutorial and how to basically make a game that will appeal to that wide audience. And his first piece of advice is start with things that everybody knows about. So I had to ignore that part. But then the next part was, build it step by step, very engaging, let people start playing the game. And so that's what I did. I really basically thought that immune defense could be that kind of mid-core casual game that would appeal to a wide audience.
yeah, that makes sense. So did you start then developing that in DC, and then I guess how did you end up out in Seattle?
Yeah, well, so it was 2012, I think, by the time I found the developers, a programmer and a medical illustrator who were brothers. They were Cosmosite LLC in DC. And together we sat down, mostly me and the programmer, Alex Slayden, and thought, okay, I want to show random motion of particles. Well, can we do that? Will it take up too much memory? And he was learning game design, or game development, and I was learning game development and immunology. So we worked it out over 18 months, and we came up with a pretty good prototype. But by then, you know, um, we needed really to put a lot more work into it to make it commercial. We had tested it. We knew kids were learning from it, remembering the concepts. What I really wanted to do was polish it, and Cosmosite didn't want to go on that ride. And I found some people in Seattle that said they did, but they were more focused on exploratory experiences. They didn't really want to make a strategy game, so they liked a game called Proteus, which you might know. It won some awards, especially for its soundtrack. But it's very experiential. There's no strategy, and it's sort of a art game where you have a really neat experience and you can save postcards. I like it a lot, but that's not what I wanted to do with Immune Defense.
Yeah.
So, as you know, I've been finding developers, pounding out the game the way I want it. So we've been like molding it, and also playtesting it. And it takes a lot of time to get data back, get ideas, try this. And so now Alex Slayden, Cosmosite, and we've made a pretty good level editor so that now I can change the size of the field, I can put in different pathogens, I can change the timing, and I can change what happens when and the messages we send to the player. It's convoluted, it's not easy, but it's effective. And so for the past year, I've been fiddling with how to introduce all the aspects of the game. And just in the past couple of months, we've gone from people who are like, oh great, thanks for letting me play this game, and after they play the first level, they hand it back to you. Now people continue to play after the first level, and they continue to play after the second level, voluntarily, you
Right.
know, and not just because I want them to. So that's what I've been trying to do for the past year is get the game to the point where people want to play it voluntarily. I'm not going to change the general knowledge about molecular biology unless I make a game that people want to play.
Yeah, it has to be a game first and teaching as well. So can't just be one or the other.
Absolutely.
So then when you moved out here and you said you worked with a couple illustrators and then you needed to they were kind of going in a different direction. Like how did you then find new developers out in Seattle? Like did you have connections for doing that or
Yeah, I always jump right into game groups. So there's the IGDA Seattle, there's Beer Wednesday, and there's Women in Games, actually. Met some good people at Women in Games. And the Reactor had an event. So I've met programmers and artists at all of those events, and they've all done bits and pieces here and there. Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, it's really good. The project is really exciting and different, and a lot of people like to volunteer their time, and
Yeah.
it's good.
So I was wondering a little bit about sort of marketing and building your fan base, how you kind of get
Oh
a list of people that are interested in, is that sort of as you go or
yeah,
just sort of initially all the way till now?
yeah. Marketing is why I'm in this airhead state right now. I've not been doing production for like 4 weeks. We got the demo ready and made a trailer, and now I'm like, oh, look at this game, look at this game. That's all I do is say, look at this game. Um, so at the Federation of American Scientists, I had a user group of about 22,000 email addresses. People would Google science game and they'd find Immune Attack and they'd sign up. And I sent a newsletter. And so I still have those people. They're still my core audience. And now what I'm doing is I'm writing to anybody who might want to know about an innovative game and who might also want to know about an innovative way to teach science. So if you walk up to the average teacher, or the average scientist, or the average video game player, and you say, I have a game that teaches science, all three of them really don't want to talk to you. The teacher's too busy. The scientist is like, oh, games are a waste of time. And the gamer is like, oh, learning games suck. So
Yeah.
no one really wants to talk to you. But if any of those three people see the game, they're totally psyched. The scientist is amazed at the actual detail. The gamer thinks it's a great game, and the teacher can see that there's a lot of things in the game that they are trying to talk about. But they all actually love it for different reasons. It makes marketing really hard. The scientists love it because it's real science. And if you go around saying it's real science, the gamers are going to just assume it's boring, and it's hard to explain. So I'm basically marketing to three audiences, and it's not easy. I've been trying to build up an audience for science games for a while. So in 2012, I started the Science Game Center, which is a website for science games where kids can review them. And any science game I've heard of, I stick up there and welcome any more science games. And so there is an audience. I mean, it's just a little website with hardly any advertising. We've got 1,800 registered users, and Facebook page has almost 3,000 likes. So,
Yeah,
we're
that's pretty
slowly
cool.
building this science game audience.
So are a lot of those users that sign up, do they also create games, or is it just people that want to play the games? You have to sign up to play them, or?
I think it's mostly people who they want to know about games and want to know more about them. You don't have to be a registered user. The website's right there. You go to Science Game Center. You can search for games by the platform or the subject matter. You can find physics games for Android, and yeah, you just find them, and then you click on the link and you go to that game's website. So we're just a conduit. You can review it if you want to, but we don't even have a way to search for highly scoring games. We really just Julie just wanted to be a magazine that would build an audience for science games.
Just kind of a place for science games to live for people to come check out.
Mhm. Mhm.
Which is cool. So is there, I guess, do you have like a curated part on the front for like new games, or do you have a newsletter, or you just kind of just anyone
Yeah.
uploads their game and searches
Yeah.
for it?
We kind of have a newsletter. Kind of me, the marketing person, is supposed to be doing the newsletter. Unfortunately, I've been me, the developer, for the past 2 years. So now that me, the marketer, is on board, I'm sending out the newsletter to Science Game Center folks. So if you get it, don't spam it. It's me.
Perfect. So let's see. So Immune Defense right now, it's on Kickstarter, so you can check that out. You can go to immunedefensegame.com, right?
That's right. Thank you very much.
So when this airs, I think there'll be like 3 days left till the Kickstarter
Oh, wow.
finishes. So
Wow. Well, yesterday, we got picked as a staff pick. So
yeah, that's really exciting. That'll be awesome.
yeah, yeah. And I just I sent out emails to press people and stuff. I'm like, ooh, really cool. We're a real game, I promise.
Yeah,
We'll
well,
see
it's
what
really
happens.
fun, and I'm excited at how much my kids will liked it. So, but yeah, so can't wait to have it come out.
Cool.
So, was there any other links you want to share or anything?
Nope. ImmuneDefenseGame.com, ScienceGameCenter.com, .org. We've got lots of research if you're interested in how to test for learning. If you want to talk to me about that, give me a call. MolecularJig.com. But yeah, that's everything.
Well, awesome. So, I guess my last question is, so what's like your top 3 pieces of advice, just for listeners? For it could be any part of your life or with game development or.
Well, yeah, I'm definitely focused on what you really want to do and don't waste time trying to be a professor if what you really want to do is make games. I would say learn how to program.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really hard to try to do things on your own. So get experience at a company doing what you say you want to do before you try to do it on your own, or else you will end up as insane as I am. Which that's not that bad, but yeah,
Yeah.
like I'm learning agile development by like running around in circles. Like I'm so agile, I don't even know what non-agile is. So
Yeah, no, that's how I feel too when I do agile development. So.
excellent.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I look forward to Immune Defense coming out. So.
Thanks. You can play the demo right now.
All right.
Cool.
Perfect.